Right, welcome to our little short film of the Jaguar. It's a 1999 year model, and I'm going to go around and show you a little bit about the projects that we've been doing on it. This was one of the bigger modifications. It was actually a total change of the braking system. So what I've done is I've taken the standard brakes and removed them and replaced them by the bigger discs and the Brembo brake calipers from the later models. So this is showing the front. As you can see, I'm still using the so-called double fives, the wheels, the standard 18-inch wheels. I quite like the design of them, so I thought it would be nice to just leave them. So here's a view from the rear, showing the quad tailpipes from Larini. So here's a view of the engine bay, where I've made quite a number of modifications, both small and large. Some of the smaller changes that I've made are standard things like changing the air filter and putting in a sports air filter. What I'm going to continue with is the input pipe, the induction pipe. I'll be changing that to a less restrictive model, and also I think what they call the MAF, the mass airflow sensor. I'm going to be changing that. But the biggest changes that have been made here, one is pretty well invisible from the outside, is the timing chains that have been replaced, and very much more important, the tensioners have been replaced by the metal types. I think in the standard car, the first versions, they were actually a kind of plastic material and were a bit prone to breakage, and of course that's a bit of a disaster because it's linked to the cam time. Another change that I've made, which has a big effect on the power, is that I've taken out the Eaton supercharger and replaced it with a 2.1 litre Kenne Bell supercharger, which I understand works somewhat more efficiently. In order to utilize that efficiency, I've changed the ratios of the pulleys, both on the bottom and on the top. Go and have a closer look at that. So you can see the slightly smaller upper pulley, and if you look further down you can see the rather large lower pulley. Now, I haven't actually made any measurements to see how much the power and more importantly the torque have increased, but you can feel by the performance of the car it's gone up quite a lot actually, and to be quite frank, I'm happy with that. I don't need to go any further. So here's a view from the other side, and on the output side I've removed the original standard exhaust and replaced it with a Larini system. I've selected the straight through version of that because I like the sound of it. The good thing about these aftermarket exhaust systems, especially the sports systems, is that they are not restrictive above the rear axle as is the standard system. So there's a nice throughput of exhaust gases. In addition to that, there is a further modification to the transmission, which is a limited slip differential, which has been installed. Obviously you can't see it from the above, but from a point of view of drivability, it's absolutely transformed the car. So here you can see the main instrument cluster, which I've totally redesigned and had the background reprinted by a company in Leeds called Lockwood International. Another thing that you'll notice is that the rev dial is now in the middle. On the standard car it's on the left and the speed dial is in the middle. The background is because of all the engine modifications that I've made. I wanted to keep a closer eye on the rev dial, quite simply. Another thing that you'll notice is the little green indicator down at the bottom left, which is an addition. It's showing the oil temperature. Green means normal, red means hot, and blue means cold. At the moment, of course, you can see it's green. On the right, go over to the right a bit, you'll see there's a little digital indicator down at the bottom right, which is also something that I've added. It's a scale from 1 to 9 to show the oil temperature, but actually that's just doubling up from what it really is intended to show, which is the gear that's selected. At the moment the box is still automatic, but I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. I'm thinking of making a manual conversion namely. In the middle I've made a slight modification. As you may notice, normally this digital readout and down to the bottom of what is now the rev dial is usually lit up with a kind of green, rather yucky colour if you ask me, colour, and I've removed the colour filter and put in just normal standard white LEDs to give it a slightly more modern look. The background itself was actually in the standard car. It's black as it is in most dials, but I've had that slightly adjusted to a rather dark green colour to match the colour of the car. And the same as if we nip over to the right here. Yeah, the same is true for the centre dials, which are otherwise rather similar to the standard dials. Another modification up the top here is that I've added, instead of the trip counter switches that are usually up here on the top right of the centre cluster, I've taken those out and replaced them with a supercharger pressure dial, as you can see. And then we just carry on down to the centre console. You can see what I've done is I've replaced the cigarette lighter, which I never used, with the trip counter switches. Here, look. Other than that, a couple of minor modifications. Just looking a little bit further back, as you can see, there are a couple of switches here and here. The one is to inhibit the aerial, because that goes up anyway, even if you're listening to a CD, which is a bit unnecessary. And the other one is, I was just talking a moment ago about the digital readout, showing the oil temperature and the gear that's selected, and that switch allows you to switch between the one mode and the other. Here you can see another shot with the sun a little bit from behind, showing more clearly the green background colour on the dials. This is the driver's side, showing the beige leather interior and the instrumentation. This is another modification. The car, when I bought it, didn't have the subwoofer in the parcel shelf, so I actually installed that myself and the amplifier to go with it. And to adjust the level of the subwoofer, I've brought up to the front volume control, which is, as you can see here, just beside the valet switch here. Look. I'm going to do that again, but this time we'll focus on the supercharger dial, because I can't get them all in at the same time. So I won't go all the way because it's a bit hard out on the road here, but let me see. I'd say that's not full acceleration, but you get the general picture. There we are. So there we have it, a 1999 Jaguar XKR. Lovely car in its standard version. And in this case, with a number of modifications made, it's become a real dream. That said, there is one big modification still to be made, and that's the exchange of the standard automatic or half-automatic gearbox for a manual 6-speed box from Tremec. It's quite a difficult change. It also requires certain modifications to the electronics. I've been in close contact with a guy called Norman Durban, who lives just west of London, who's running a project in which he's making just that change. He's more or less finished now, so I'm looking forward to receiving the parts and making the change myself. The change itself involves, of course, mechanics, but also electronics. There's like a special electronic box, kind of like a magic box, which that is Norman, procures from a company in Derby called EAPJ. The idea of this little magic box is it tricks the engine in thinking there is indeed an automatic box behind it, but in reality it's of course the manual box. So looking forward to making that modification, and thank you very much for viewing.